Thank you for inviting me. And just to say that really to be in the space with everybody, it really, really is a privilege. And to hear people's story of transformation, I'm sure everyone who's watching shares in my enthusiasm and love for what I'm hearing. So, you know, I've also had my transformation and the journey that I've been on. So what I would like to start off talking about, well, really, it's just posing a question, because I thought about this for a long time, and this was part of me finding my freedom when I really looked at the thoughts and I thought, well, hang on, am I thinking my thoughts or are my thoughts thinking me? And I think that, you know, knowing the difference makes all the difference in how we experience our lives. And so spending a lot of time, because, you know, thoughts creating our reality, thoughts being powerful. We've heard everyone talk about, we've heard freedom and love and listening properly and taking accountability, magical manifesting, these limiting beliefs from early trauma. And so often what it boils down to is the foundation of what we're thinking and what we're believing about ourselves and the world around us. So if we were thinking our thoughts, let's just talk about anxiety or depression. I mean, would we suffer from anxiety or depression if we were thinking our thoughts? Would we deliberately think thoughts that fill us with fear, fear about our lives, the people that we love? Would there be addiction in the world? I mean, surely we would stay away from the thoughts that tell us to have a drink at 8 o'clock in the morning. We'd just be able to kind of switch off our thoughts, right? We switch on and we can think, and then we switch off and then, peace and quiet. But we know that that's not really how it works, because if you just sit for 5 minutes in silence, you realize that there isn't any silence, because we have these thoughts entering and exiting our minds throughout the day. In fact, we have something like 60 to 70,000 of them. And it's amazing because it's this voice, it's this inner narrator, it's this dialogue that keeps happening over and over again. But the interesting thing is that there is actually a switch, an on and an off switch. The challenge is that we have very little control over that switch. Because if you think about when you are really focused and you're concentrating on something, if you're communicating, if you're planning, creating, problem solving, the mind is in a focused mode, the brain is in a focused mode. And then as soon as you're inactive and you're in a resting state, what happens is certain parts of the brain light up. It's called the default mode network. And the interesting thing is these parts of the brain that light up bring about self-conscious thinking, daydreaming, thinking about others, ruminating about the past, projecting into the future. And that's what happens, because then our thoughts are thinking us, as opposed to when we're in the focus mode where we are thinking our thoughts. So the switch happens, but the problem is we don't know when the switch has switched. So an example, you're walking down the road, it's a beautiful day, the sun is shining, you feel the sun on your face, and you're on your way to an interview. And without realizing it, a thought just slips into your conscious awareness. And before you know it, you hear that voice, and the voice is saying, oh, I shouldn't have worn these shoes. They're so uncomfortable. No, but you had to, because I mean, you look very smart. You have to make an impression. Yeah, but I don't even know why I'm going to this interview. I'm not prepared for this interview. I'm not qualified. No, but here's an opportunity to have a job. No, I'm not going to get it. In fact, I'm so sick and tired of people talking. And you go on and on and on. And instead of walking down the road with a beautiful sun on your face, where are you? You're in a movie. The simulation in your mind, you know, and you're in this interview and you're failing and you're not getting the job. And that is just a case of your thoughts thinking you. And it's the lost in thought that really creates our suffering. So this idea of thinking our thoughts or our thoughts thinking us really, really interests me. So some people call a whole collection of thoughts like a jumble of thoughts. I like to call it a soundtrack of thoughts. Because if you think about it, our thoughts are the soundtrack to our lives. I mean, what does a soundtrack bring to a movie? Think about a movie without a soundtrack. I mean, yes, the actors, very important, obviously, the director, the script, everything, but the soundtrack is what brings it all together. It changes your experience of it. I mean, just imagine that iconic movie where you have those young men running on the beach and you've got the Chariots of Fire music in the background. I mean, that's uplifting, it's inspiring, it's motivating. That's what the soundtrack does. Or that other iconic scene where you've got these kids in the sea and they're squealing and they're so happy. And if there was normal music playing in the background, you'd think, oh, this is absolutely fantastic. But then, of course, you hear that Jaws soundtrack and you're filled with fear. And you know, these soundtracks create the entire experience. And we have a soundtrack playing in the background. And just like so many of the speakers before, you know, Carlos spoke about it, Richard spoke about these limiting beliefs we have, these beliefs we have from childhood, these past experiences, our history that imprint on this moment. It's here, as well as our current circumstances. This creates the soundtrack that plays in the background. And the thing about the soundtrack is when we're not aware, we're playing kind of on shuffle. You know, we don't have choice what comes up. It's like walking down the street. It just slips in, and then we're in this movie in our mind. And that really is a case when the thoughts are thinking us. There was an interesting research done by Harvard. Two psychologists did research, Matthew Killingsworth, and they wanted to see what made people happy and what made people unhappy. And so they tracked their emotional state and their thinking state. And what they found, very interesting, is that 47% of the day we are lost in thought. And not only that, but when we are lost in thought and we come back, we are less happy. So that's what I mean why we have the switch, but we don't really have control over it. And you see, our thoughts create everything, if we've heard from a lot of our speakers, because we think something and then we have the sensation in our body and then the emotion comes out and then we take action. It becomes absolutely real. And so because our thoughts feel so real, because we experience our thoughts, we think we are our thoughts. So Michael Singer, who wrote The Untethered Soul, talks about the roommate in your head. And what I loved and really was a huge enlightening moment for me was the realization that I wasn't my thoughts, that I was the observer of my thoughts. So all of these thoughts coming in my mind, you know, the soundtrack would be the one that traps the thought and then creates the reality. As soon as I realized I'm simply the observer, I'm not my thoughts, I was free. And so it gives you a space when you realize that you are not the thinker, you are the observer, to pause, to select the soundtrack you want playing, and then to press play. So are we thinking our thoughts? Are our thoughts thinking us? Both. But with intentionality, with tenacity, we can choose which soundtrack we're going to play. Thanks.